The evenings are getting longer, the leaves are changing colors, and Halloween is quickly approaching. It's a dark, creepy evening, and you've decided to curl up in bed for some creepy and eerie stories. So, what better time for me to share some more ghostly tales with you? Tonight, I will bring you true haunting tales of paranormal encounters and the things that haunt our nightmares. So, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. Let's dive into our first story. Has anyone in the medical field ever experienced seeing anything creepy while working in a hospital or nursing home setting? I was hired onto a job in an assisted living facility with approximately 20 or so residents. It was a few times I've seen this thing. As I said, I've worked in this assisted living facility, working from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. When night fell, they were simply the worst times for me. While working or walking the halls to make sure my residents were safe, I felt watched, and not just watched by like my other coworker or residents, mind you. The evening shift only had 2 staff members after 6 ending dinner until the next shift arrives. Well, as I said, I felt watched, and it creeped me out. And it doesn't help knowing that this facility sat basically surrounded by the woods. But this small town was haunted, and known to be the most haunted in the United States. To give you a hint on where, it's also known for the Sally House. Back to the story. It was one evening in November. It was time after the residents cleared and headed off to bed. So for me and my coworker working with me as well, this night meant downtime. We decided to go outside for some fresh air and just play on our phones. That's when something told me to look, and I turned my head and saw a tall man in all black facing us through one of the side door window, facing the side porch where we were sitting. This man or thing had a top hat uncovering half his face. I don't know what I did or why I had to look away for a slight second, but I did, and when I looked again, he was gone. Creepiest home alone experience. When I was around the ages of 12-13, I would often be left home alone after school. My parents and my younger sisters normally didn't arrive home for about an hour and a half. I normally didn't mind being alone at all. I could eat whatever I wanted, watch TV at a loud volume without being yelled at, and yell about how shitty my day was to my friends on FaceTime without being interrupted. On that particular day, I walked in the door and dropped my bags. All I wanted to do was eat a fresh bowl of mac and cheese and cry. I was exhausted, so I got to doing just that. As soon as I began to boil the water, I heard the unmistakable sound of somebody wearing big heavy snow boots walking around downstairs. I knew it couldn't have been anybody in my family, because my father, who was always the first one home besides me, wouldn't be home for another hour. Even if he had gotten home early, he would have messaged me, and I would have clearly heard the garage door open. To stop myself from panicking, I told myself that the washing machine was most likely uneven, and I should go and check on it. I turned the stove off, and just in case somebody was breaking in, I grabbed a giant kitchen knife and went downstairs. The washing machine, or the dryer, wasn't even running. My brain basically froze. I stood in front of the stairway for a good minute trying to figure out what I had heard, trying to put some kind of calming explanation behind it. When all of a sudden, the room went freezing cold, and I felt somebody standing behind me. When whoever this was breathed down my neck, it was over. I full-on sprinted up the stairs, not only hearing footsteps behind me, but also hearing heavy breathing. When I got to the top of the stairs, I remembered I was holding a knife. I spun around to teach this mofo not to go into people's houses, and when I did, nobody was there. I assumed that the intruder had retreated downstairs, so I locked myself in the bathroom and messaged my dad. He told me to stay put and to not make any loud sounds. When I asked him if I should call 911, he said no. There I sat, in the bathroom, trying not to cry, because my worst nightmare had finally come true. When all of a sudden, I heard the sound of the heavy boots again. But this time, they were walking up the stairs. I quickly messaged my dad to see if he was home, and he said no. I felt my stomach drop as the footsteps came closer and closer until they were right at the door. I covered my mouth with my hand, but that still didn't cover the sound of my heavy breathing due to sheer panic. I could see the shadow of this person's feet in the crack underneath the door. I could hear him breathing on the door. I stood there, silencing my cries, tears rushing down my face. I was horrified. All of a sudden, I heard my dad's garage door open. A rush of relief filled my body. I heard the intruder run into my parents' room. My dad checked the entire house. There was nothing, no broken windows, all the doors were locked, and of course there was no intruder. My dad joked about how it was just my imagination. He said that I was just paranoid. To this day, I still can't explain it. I know what I heard. I know what I felt. It's just Mom, I thought, and I opened my eyes. It was not my mom. I found an eyeless boy. He had black, empty sockets about my age, sitting at the foot of my bed. He extended his hand, and in it was a little box. I was startled, but reached out. He pulled back. I reached again and said, "Give it." Then I blinked, and when I reopened my eyes, he was gone. But I could still see the imprint where he'd sat on my bed. Fast forward 5 years. My girlfriend came over to do homework. After she finished, she took a nap while she waited for her parents. When they arrived, I tried waking her up. She opened her eyes suddenly, looking up at a corner where the wall met the ceiling. She pointed there and went back to sleep. I shook her again. She came to full consciousness, and I explained what she'd done. She looked haunted. Up on the wall, I saw a little boy with no eyes. He was there, in a Spider-Man pose, staring at me. I freaked out and told her my story about the same kid. Fast forward another 5 years. I was with the same girlfriend, and we had a 2-year-old. We were living in my parents' house, in my old room. My daughter started waking up at the same time every night, and she'd talk. After a while, I noticed she had almost the same conversation every night. I playfully asked her once whom she was talking to. She said, "It's a little boy. He's nice. He's lost and looking for his mommy." My daughter's nightly conversations continued until we got our own place later that year. My husband and I own a martial arts school, and the building that it's in, which we also own, is about 130 years old, next to a church. And I never believed in the paranormal, but the things that happened in it didn't just happen to me. It was decrepit, which was why it was so cheap to purchase, and we basically did all the work ourselves. Old, creaky, drafty. A bunch of things happened there. Here's one. One Saturday morning, my husband was on his computer in another room. I'm in the apartment playing with the Tamagotchi app on my iPad when I heard the stereo sitting in front of me click on, and a girl's voice started talking from it. I thought he controlled the stereo from his computer, so I ignored it because he often put on music to work out before class started. I do remember thinking, what kind of weird-ass music is he listening to anyway? Because the voice just said, "Hi, my name is," but I'm not 100% sure because I wasn't paying attention. I have never known Katie in my life. I didn't catch the specifics because I wasn't really listening, but that went on for about 2 or 3 minutes until it suddenly went, "Something's hurting me." And when I caught that, I looked up and squinted at the stereo like, what? Something's killing me. Something killed me. At this point, the hair is standing on the back of my neck, and I'm getting up from the couch to take a closer look. Please, someone tell my parents. Tell the teachers. Tell the corrections officer. At the words corrections officer, I just bolt into the other room and start yelling at my husband and cursing him out because I was certain he was playing a trick on me. Told him, "We don't play jokes about dead people." And he's of course looking at me like, what the hell? When he finally calmed me down long enough to get what I heard out of me and what I was accusing him of, he told me it was impossible and led me to the stereo. It's not plugged in. A few days ago, I was sitting with my parents in their house. Suddenly, The topic turned to paranormal things because recently, something strange has been happening to my mother. My mother began reminding my father of the time when we were walking to my grandmother's house one evening, my father, mother, sister, and me. I was the youngest then, only 6 years old. A woman dressed in white, holding a bowl in her hands, appeared in front of the four of us. We all froze at that moment. The woman, in her white dress, was floating in the air, and her legs weren't visible beneath the dress. She quickly turned toward the wheat field beside us, and we could see the waves in the wheat as she moved through it. My father began to follow her, while we, in my mother's arms, waited to see what would happen. Beyond the wheat field was a river. My father reached the river, but the woman was nowhere to be seen. She couldn't have crossed the river, so where did she disappear? My father returned, pale, looked at my mother, and simply told us to keep walking. While my mother was telling this story, I jumped out of my chair and said that I had always thought I had dreamed it, and that this dream had haunted me for years, because I still remember it as clearly as day. My mother said that it really did happen, and from that day, she no longer looked at the world the same way. My father was as pale as he was that day, terrified by the mere thought of the event. So a few years ago, my husband and I were hanging out in our living room watching TV. We live on a busy street with our windows facing towards the street. We heard a small bang. We've had people crash along the street a lot, so we went out to investigate. There was a man in the street. Earlier that day, I had mentioned that it was surprising that we never see pedestrian accidents, considering we live in one of the worst cities for pedestrian accidents. This man was not moving, but still seemingly alive. My husband jumped into the street and stopped the cars driving towards him. The other cars all stopped, threw their hazards on, and blocked the road until emergency services got there. Someone else followed the car that hit him and came back with license plate numbers. The ambulance took him away, but left his clothes filled in the middle of the street outside our bedroom. I thought that was it really. We did what we could. Then something started haunting my room. The first time, I felt my husband rub my back as he does when he goes to sleep. I turned over to reciprocate, and he was turned over completely passed out. I shook him awake, and he had no recollection of that. He had also come into bed hours ago. The next time, I heard him open the door and sit down on the bed. Our schedules were opposite at that time, so I was used to it. But I didn't hear him put his keys down earlier, which was part of the routine. So all of a sudden, he is there on the bed. But no, he isn't. The weight is there, but he is not. The last time, I woke up and noted the sun was up, which meant he needed to be at work, but it still felt like he was in bed. I touched his chest to see if he was there. We have blackout curtains and total darkness. I felt him, chest hair and all. I leaned over to my side of the bed to check the time. He was so late. I went to wake him up, and he was gone. He had left at his normal time. I feel like this spirit is messing with me, and I've done every cleansing method I can think of. It is still here after years. Also, I do have vivid dreams, so for a while, I chalked it up to that. But these are real, alive, awake feelings that I cannot understand. For some context, growing up my family was very involved with our church. My mom worked there, as did my sister, so we were there like 3 or 4 times a week. As a kid, I would always hear about spooky stories of the church at night, people seeing figures or hearing strange noises. I always felt frightened to be there alone at night, considering how big of a building it was. The upstairs was the sanctuary and offices, with the school and daycare being downstairs, and the gym and cafe was a separate building that was connected by a sidewalk and a parking lot in the middle. When I was around 14, me and a friend of mine would skateboard in the parking lot between the gym and the church. One night, it was around 10 p.m., everyone was gone. Not a single car in the parking lot, except for my sister, who was in the gym cleaning while we skated outside. All of a sudden, I glanced across the street and saw a light quickly turn on and off in the daycare. I thought I was going crazy until I saw a head quickly peek through the window. I stood in fear and told my friend to run in the gym to tell my sister. She was assuring us no one was there because the motion detectors in the building had not gone off. About 3 weeks later, we had a birthday party in the gym. At this point, I had completely forgotten about the figure in the window until my mom asked me to run across to her office on the floor above the window I saw the figure in. I instantly thought about being in that building alone and didn't want to, so I asked her to go with me. We walked over to the empty building, unlocked the door, and turned off the security alarm. Just a few minutes later, we both swore we heard something walking out in the hallway. I peeked out the door, but saw no one. Then right as I told her no one was there, we both heard this loud, high-pitched laugh that echoed through the entire church. Our flight or fight response kicked in, and that response was flight. We ran out the building and down to the gym and quickly told my dad about what had just happened. At first we thought someone from the birthday party in the gym snuck over, but we were assured by everyone that no one else left. I have plenty more stories like this from that church, which we quit attending for other reasons. To this day, I still hear of people hearing laughter while they're alone in that building. There is a beautiful park in Denver called Cheeseman Park, and it was built on a cemetery. The cemetery mostly housed the bodies of poor and transient people, and when they decided to transform the space into a park, they hired cheap labor that cut corners on removing bodies. Today, it's estimated there are as many as 2,000 bodies or partial bodies still buried there. The park is said to be haunted, which I never quite believed, until one night. In the early aughts, I purchased a beach cruiser bike, single speed and very heavy. One evening, I decided to take a quick trip to the grocery store on my bike, which took me right through the park. I rode via the dirt jogging path that marks the perimeter of the park. The path can be a bit hilly in places, making it quite a chore on my hefty bike. As I worked my way up one of the hills, slow as molasses, I could hear a jogger approaching from the rear. The sound of feet rhythmically hitting the dirt path was distinct and gained on me quickly. Embarrassed by my struggle to ride through the terrain, I veered my bike to the right to allow the jogger to pass. But they didn't pass. I continued to try and ride as quickly as I could, but the feet were right behind me, and every time I swerved to let the jogger pass, they just got closer until they were right on the heels of my back tire. Feeling self-conscious, and as if they were doing this to be a jerk, I finally pulled into the grass quickly and dropped my bike, ready to make a snarky comment to whoever was being such a prick. But when I turned around to confront the jogger, there was no one there or anywhere in my line of sight. I know this isn't the scariest of stories, but as a skeptic, it's always stuck with me. I know the sound of jogging on that path, and I know the feeling of someone following closely behind. I can't think of any other explanation for my experience that doesn't tend toward the paranormal. I don't even like to tell this story because I feel like no one will believe me. Side note, my friends' names have been changed for this story, as they are still together and very reluctant to ever bring this up. This must have been around 2007. One night, 2 friends and I were out ghost hunting in a very remote little town in western New York. My friend Jane wanted a couple more pictures in the old cemetery, so her boyfriend and I waited in my SUV while she did her thing. It must have been around midnight, and we were parked on a back road, but there were some street lights up ahead. Jane was behind us and off to the right, but we could still see her and her flashlight. John and I happened to be looking up the road when, about 50-65 yards ahead, out from under the streetlight on the left-hand side, appeared a black figure in a wide-brim hat. He just appeared. It was blacker than black, more like a void. 100% it was not a person. This being had absolutely no features, but we could make out the hat from the profile. It was a flat-top hat with a wide brim around it. It took maybe 30 steps before it morphed, only way I can describe it, into a black cat before it reached the streetlight on the opposite side of the road and disappeared into a field. Again, you could tell it was the shape of a cat, but it was just a black void. John and I stared at each other for about 2 minutes before we could even speak. When the time came, all he could say was, "You saw that too, didn't you?" We continued to sit there in absolute awe and sheer terror. Jane came back not long after, and I couldn't even move to unlock the doors. I was able to move my hand just enough to hit the unlock button and let her back in. She jokingly said, "You both look like you saw the devil himself." John was a huge guy, very tall, muscular, and intimidating. I looked back over, and he was shaking and in tears. All he could say was "cat." I tried to explain to Jane what had happened, but I struggled to even talk. It was about a 35-minute drive back home, and I can remember Jane saying things like, "This isn't funny anymore. You guys are scaring me." John insisted we take him to his church, where we both said a prayer to Mother Mary at the outdoor statue. While he continued to pray, I tried to explain to Jane what we had seen. I remember telling her and thinking how crazy I sounded. To this day, it still gives me a chill to my core. Whatever it was not of this earth is all I know. A part of me wants answers so badly, but then I keep thinking maybe I'm better off not knowing exactly what it was. Jane and I lost touch over the years, but did reconnect eventually. We talked about that night, as it was always the elephant in the room. She told me that following that incident, all of the crosses in her mom's house would randomly turn upside down for a couple weeks after this happened to us. It only stopped when Jane's mom went around the house very deep in prayer and blessed it. Jane and John lived with her at the time. Did something follow them home? I've never seen anything like that again, and I pray I never will. After the devastating tsunami in 2011, college student Yuka Kudo traveled to Ishinomaki, a town where 6,000 people died, and asked cab drivers if they had had any unusual experiences after the disaster. Most ignored her, but 7 cab drivers talked of picking up ghost passengers, and their accounts were eerily similar. According to the drivers, the ghosts who looked like normal people would get into their cabs and give their destination, only to disappear without paying the fare. One such passenger asked her driver to take her to a district that had been wiped out by the waves. When he told her what it was like there, she asked, "Have I died?" When he turned around to look at her, she was gone. I am a mental health therapist. One of my schizophrenic clients said he was seeing a girl in his room, and he said she was talking to him. We believed it to be a hallucination, as he was living alone. The doctor I was with decided to challenge his delusion, and had him take a picture of her so we could meet her during the next visit. He brought a picture, and yes, she was there. To our astonishment and horror, there was a picture of him on the couch with a strange creamy, ghost-like image of a girl hovering behind him, shrouding him in white like wings or hair, very light in color, but subtle shimmering image. What was eerie was seeing him sitting on the couch with his head down, very depressed looking. She was literally haunting him. All our jaws hit the floor. You could hear a pin drop. Everyone examined the picture, and we could tell it was real. He was very low functioning and could not have shocked it. It got real. We were haunted. The doctor, in utter amazement, knew medication wouldn't treat this and said, "I can't help you with this. You are going to need to see your clergy for this." Once I was staying over a friend's house and was sleeping in her bed. She had a large double bed pushed up against the wall, so we both slept in there. I slept with my back facing the room that night, with my friend sleeping next to me. About midway through the night, I start having a very elaborate dream about work. The dream wasn't anything significant, just something stupid. Then, as it progressed, it became more ominous. A man wearing a mask similar to a Japanese kabuki mask was chasing me around my workplace, attempting to kill me. Then at some point, I began to wake up, as I felt someone standing directly behind me. The dream progresses again, and the man has found me. At that point, my wakeful state began to set in further, as I could feel someone gently stroking my hair. Terrified, I laid there, slightly disorientated, as I was still somewhat in my dream. Then I hear a gravelly voice from behind me say, "Hello, little girl," and a number of other things I can't remember, as well as the sensation of someone still stroking my hair. I am fully awake at this point, but lying still as can be, with my eyes pressed shut, fearing for my life. Finally, I mustered up the courage to sit up in bed and look around the room. There was no one there. To this day, I can still remember the deep, gravelly sound of his voice. The thing that made it real for me is when I told the dream to my friend. She recounted several harrowing tales of seeing an older man's spirit wandering around her house. When I was about 13 or 14, I lived in a normal block house in a suburban neighborhood with my family. We were told by the previous tenant that her husband had died in the house, but we weren't told specifically where. One night after I turned the lights off to go to sleep, I heard a loud rustling noise, and then a bang that caused me to jump up and turn the lights on. Everyone in the house heard it and ran into the hallway to see if I was okay. As I looked into my room to see what the noise was, I saw my jewelry box, which had a set of doors on the front, which latched shut fully open with all the drawers hanging open. I threw that thing in the closet so quick and never pulled it out to use again. I still heard things in that house. One night, I was watching something funny on TV in my room and heard a man seemingly sitting right next to me laugh in my ear as clear as day. It wasn't from the TV. I am pretty sure I am actually the only person in my family that does not have a personal ghost story. I find my family to be very intelligent people that would not make this up. But it's also hard to imagine something that you yourself have never experienced. You know? So, here are some of their stories, which are pretty creepy. My mother lived in a haunted house when she was very young. They feel that there was more than one spirit in the house. Apparently, the house had a colored history. Once my mother woke up in the middle of night, and a dark figure was messing with the items on her bedside table. She assumed it was my grandmother and asked her what she was doing. A voice in her head told her to go back to sleep, and she did. The next morning, she asked her mother what she had been doing in her room that night, and my grandmother confirmed that it was not her in there. They considered their parents' room, I believe, to be the most haunted. Once my mother and uncle were, I guess, having some sort of endurance contest and were hiding under the bed covers. They could hear something playing with a vacuum cleaner, and my mom just bolted, leaving my uncle to suffer alone. He finally springs out of the bed and runs, and literally dives off the top of a rather steep stairway, and then proceeds to float to the bottom of the stairs where my grandpa just happens to be waiting with open arms. They all swear there is no way he would have been able to jump all those steps. Another time, my mom was kind of a tomboy, and was outside getting beat up by some neighborhood boys. And she looked up at her house and could see what she believed was my grandpa just sitting in his study window watching, and she couldn't figure out why he wasn't helping her. When she finally got inside and confronted him, he swore up and down that he hadn't been in his study all day long. Apparently, they had babysitters that would run out of the house in the middle of the night because of scary things that happened. In later years, when I was about 10 or so, my mom worked at a local restaurant after closing, cleaning the place up. It was always rumored that the place was haunted, and she had so many scary experiences that she eventually wouldn't even go alone. So my stepfather started going with her and experienced some of the craziness himself. She would put up all the chairs on the tables, turn around briefly, and turn back, and they would all be back down again. But apparently the ghost's favorite game was running in and out of the large metal door to the kitchen. One night it kept happening over and over and over again, until finally my stepfather put a tall metal bread rack in front of the door. A few moments later they heard a loud bang and went to check. Something had run into the door so hard that it left a dent from the door, hitting the bread rack on the other side. The only other one I can think of comes from my older sister. She lived alone in an old apartment complex, also rumored by many to be haunted. She says that she was washing her face in the sink one night and looked into the mirror to see another face behind her. She said that she was calm and told them that she didn't mind sharing the space as long as they left her alone and didn't try and scare her, or something like that. When visiting my sister's college, she sent me into the theater to get some stuff for her. It was after dark and the building was locked, but she lent me her keys. Now, she told me that the place had a reputation for being haunted, but being the skeptic I am, I took the keys and hustled off without a second thought. I let myself in, headed to the closet she said her stuff was in, and someone walked up behind me. No kidding, I could hear the footsteps, feel the floorboards move, and hear them creak. Heck, I could even hear the rustle of fabric moving, and there was just that indefinable sense of there being someone else there. You know, how you can tell when someone's walked into a room, even if you didn't really see or hear them. Yeah, well, I turned around fully expecting to have to explain why I was in a locked building after hours, and there was no one there. After I shat myself, I started singing at the top of my lungs to mask the now ominous silence, grabbed my sister's stuff, and bolted out of the building. My sister apologized for days, and I never went into that building alone again, day or night. My first apartment during college was haunted. I had a really long hallway that led from my room to the front door. At night, I would often hear footsteps echoing in the hall when my roommate wasn't home. My dog would hear it too, and just start barking and looking out into the hall, as if he saw someone there. One night while I was studying, I noticed the sign I had hanging on my doorknob start swinging back and forth. No windows were open, the AC wasn't on, there was no reason for it to be moving. I said, "Stop," and it promptly stopped swinging. A few months later, I found out from the landlord that a few years prior a tenant had hung himself in the basement. Maybe it was him. This is the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. Most people I tell try to come up with a logical explanation, but there is none. So, after living in my new house for 5 months or so, I decided to take a shower. One of my friends had just slept over. I had taken a crap ton of showers in that bathroom already, so it's not like it was anything new. So I take my shower, get out to dry off, and look at the steamed up mirror. On the mirror, in perfect writing no human could do with their finger read, something along the lines of, "Dear Father, please forgive me." I completely forget the rest because I was just so freaked out, but it was terrifying. The bathroom door was locked the entire time, and no one could have gotten in. It had also never been there any other time I took a shower, so yeah, no idea what that was, but it scared the crap out of me. I was 19. I used to walk to Denny's from my house every evening, leaving around 8 or 9 p.m. There, I would hang out with my friends, smoke and drink coffee, and play cards until 2 or 3 in the morning. This one particular evening, I left later than usual, probably around 11 p.m. or so. The Denny's was 5.7 miles from my house, so it was a bit of a walk. So I'm walking along like I had done dozens of times before. I get to a wooded area that always got dark, and I started hearing music from a house off the road. Just heavy bass drums with a real steady beat. Not a big deal, because people out that way always had big parties. I continue walking, but the music doesn't go away. I stop and listen real carefully, and it sounds more like drums in a continuous loop. There's not another parallel road for a couple miles from where I am, so it cannot come from a vehicle. I continue walking, and for about 2 miles I continue to hear this music. Never gets louder and never gets quieter. I stop and listen again. It sounds a lot like Native American drums. I walk again, quickening my pace. As I walk, listening to the drums that are following me, I start to smell gunpowder. I walk a mile listening to drums and smelling gunpowder. I may have started getting really creeped out, so I'm not sure if I heard footsteps behind me or if it was just my imagination. I only hear them for a couple 100 feet. Then I walk into a clearing in the woods, and it all disappears. The drums stop. I don't smell gunpowder, no footsteps except mine. Just me walking. I get to Denny's entirely shook up, but I didn't share my story for a few days. My brother Joel was killed in an ATV accident a little over 4 years ago. My daughter has just turned 3. She kept waking up in the middle of the night and coming into my room. When I would take her back to bed and ask her why she was getting up, she would reply, "The guy in my room." She would always point to the corner that her dresser was in and swore there was a guy in her room. It wasn't long after that she was always talking about Uncle Jodash's never met him. Really weird. When I was about 12 years old, I had a dream shortly before Halloween. In the dream, I was out trick-or-treating on Halloween night. I was in this overgrown woodsy area in my neighborhood running away from a house a couple of blocks away from where I lived. I realized that I was running from the ghost of a woman when I saw her come flying toward me. I woke up in a cold sweat. That December, I found out that the house that I had been running from in the dream belonged to an older woman. She lived alone and didn't have any family in the area. A friend of my mother's was delivering Christmas cookies and found her dead in the house. They estimated that she had been there since about August. I don't actually believe in ghosts, but it was very strange. We moved to our new house in 1970 when I was 5. The weirdness started pretty much straight away. The first night we were there, my dad's watch, a typical 1970s stainless steel brick of a thing which he always put on his bedside table, was found in the morning to be completely dismantled, like someone had taken a lump hammer to it. Even the main spring had been stretched out, all 18 inches from my sleeping dad's head. Over the next 40 years, we have had all kinds of weirdness, from sudden temperature drops and cold spots which moved. I regularly had to move my bed around every month or so, which were so extreme. I can remember my breath condensing in June. One evening, we came home and found the hatch to the attic ajar. It was never opened normally, and there were muddy paw prints all around it. On the ceiling, we didn't have a dog. We have an antique clock, which apparently hadn't worked since before I was born, and was kept as a sort of ornament. The hands on the clock would change time when you weren't looking at it, literally. It would be on, say, 6:45. You would look away, then look back, and it would be 3:30. I remember a perfect circle of thunderflies on the ceiling over my bed, which just sort of evaporated, and we were forever hearing people or furniture moving around in rooms we knew were empty. I was 5 when we moved there, and the oldest of 3 kids. Although none of us would ever sleep with the light off, I don't ever remember being scared. Looking back, I remember us talking about the ghost almost like an irritating, eccentric relative. After we had extensive work done on the house in the early 80s, the ghost settled down a bit, and there was less weirdness. The last time it made its presence felt was about 5 years ago. My dad was away, and my bro was popping in to check that all was well. As always, he went through the house, turning the lights on before he went into a room, and then off as he left. Eventually, he was back at the front door about to leave, switched the light off. It was dark out, and as the hallway went dark, someone gave a breathy gasp right in his ear. After he had got control of himself and stopped accelerating, he had to go back and shut the front door. For the record, I am an atheist who regularly has seen ghosts throughout my life. I don't believe in the undead or in restless spirits or New Age hoodoo. I have no idea what caused the weirdness in my house. Oh, and one last thing. When I was about 20, I'm 46 now, I met a woman completely randomly who had lived in the same house in the mid-60s, who told me she remembers it as a warm and friendly place with no weirdness of any sort. I pet sit consistently at a house that's haunted. I've always been a believer in ghosts, spirits, entities, whatever, and watched scary movies about that sort of thing all the time, but had never experienced it. Well, the first time my pet sat at this house, I noticed some weird things. I was going to sleep upstairs the second night, and had both animals in the room with me, when I started to hear plates moving downstairs in the kitchen. This consistently went on for 10 minutes, and then stopped. I never had the guts to check it out. Also, on other occasions the floor vent would be across the room. Garage motion sensor lights would alternate turning on and off when I was out there, and things would be tipped over out of place. Also, they had 3 chiming grandfather clocks. That was the worst. I still pet sit there, but sleep on the couch with the TV on every night. It pays good money, what can I say? When I was around 7 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night because I thought I heard a loud noise in the house. I walked out of my room and glanced down the long hallway where I could see the streetlight shining through the window onto the kitchen floor. I rubbed my eyes, and I saw what appeared to be my younger brother standing just beyond the beam of light in the shadow. I walked towards him to see what was going on, and as I got closer and closer, it became more and more clear that this small boy was not my brother at all. It was standing there super still, head tilted, and just staring at me with these piercing, dark eyes that I'll never ever forget. I ran straight into my parents' room as fast as I could and slept in their bed that night. I never brought it up to them, and I did my best to try and forget it. I think I almost convinced myself that I made it up in my head. Fast forward several years later, and I'm a senior in high school hanging with my then girlfriend, my brother, and a few of his friends at our house. It was dark and storming outside, and our power had just gone out. I decided to light a candle, put it in the middle of us, and we were all just laying there talking on the floor. Someone randomly suggested we tell ghost stories, and I immediately thought about my encounter 10 years prior. I said, "Hey guys, I'm going to tell you all something that I've never told a single soul. I saw something many years ago right here in this very house, and I don't care if you believe me or not. I 100% saw something paranormal right over there actually." I then pointed over to the kitchen. Before I could even start my story, my brother goes, "Wait a second, are you serious?" I glanced over at him, confused as to why he interrupted me. He then looked me dead in the eyes, his face distressed and turning a little bit white, and said, Did you happen to see a little boy?" My jaw dropped, and I was at a complete loss for words. Everyone around us immediately started freaking out too, because they instantly grasped that we had both seen the same thing. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. My sister's best friend lost her father on Christmas Day to a drunk driver. I want to say it was in 1994. Her dad was a great guy and a creature of habit. He'd get home from work, sit in his recliner to watch TV, and their little terrier Kayla would sit between his leg and the armrest of the chair. Left side every time. Anytime you came over and he was home, he was in that chair, Kayla right next to him. A few days after his passing, they had the funeral service and a reception at the house. My sister's friend took a Polaroid picture of the living room during the reception with the recliner almost perfectly centered in the frame and Kayla sitting in her usual spot, sans dad. After waiting a few moments for the photo to develop, everyone was a bit shocked to see her dad sitting in the chair. You could see a translucent image of him in the chair, almost like when film would have a superimposed image. The right side of him was pretty well defined. You could see his glasses, shirt, hand, leg, and foot. The left side of him was not well defined and mostly not visible. The weird thing is, his left side of his body was severely injured in the accident. They thought it must have been an issue with the film or camera, so they sent it off to Polaroid to check it out. They sent everything back with an evaluation stating there was no issue with the camera or the remaining film in the cartridge. One night, I woke to something settling over my face. Initially, I thought it was my bed covers, but then I realized it all felt wrong. I reached up, grabbed the cloth, and threw it. I reached over to turn on my bedside light and froze because of what I saw. All of my clothes, which previously had been folded neatly in a basket, were now stacked atop of me, neck to toe. The piece of cloth that was settling over my face was a pair of my son's shorts, so of course I froze and listened for whoever was in my home. I stayed that way for about 10 minutes and heard nothing. I got up and started to search my house. The only other person that lived with me was my 8-year-old son, and I found him fast asleep in his top bunk. I know he didn't stack those clothes because the bunk he was in was metal and very squeaky, and he would have definitely made noise getting in or out. He is a pretty serious kid, and I've never known him to play tricks. In any case, I felt that last piece go over my face, so he wasn't there for that. I searched the entire house, and no one was there but us. I believe it was poltergeist activity. Apparently, stacking is typically what poltergeists do. I also found a random puddle of water once in the middle of the living room when no one had been home. There was no place that could have come from either. Strange stuff. When I was 15, my dad was driving to a friend's house to practice some roller hockey. My buddy lived in a 2-story log cabin with a long, winding driveway. It was the first time I had been to his house and had been told his parents wouldn't be home until later in the evening. As we drove up, my dad says he thought my friend's parents weren't home. I told him they weren't, and he then points to a 2nd-story window and says, "Well, someone is here." I look up and see an older male dressed in Western clothing and wearing a big cowboy hat. "This is Texas, so that isn't unusual," I said. "I guess they got home early," and shrugged it off. A while later, I mentioned something about asking his parents something, and he says they won't be home till later. I point out both my dad and I saw someone in his house, and he freaks out because no one was supposed to be there. We then go in the house to check it out and don't find anyone. After his parents got home, we were in a back room of the house, and I see a picture of the guy who had been upstairs. I point it out to my buddy, and he turns white and says that was his granddad who died 6 years earlier. Turns out, my buddy's parents believed the house to be haunted by multiple spirits. My biological dad owns a creepy, old farmhouse he renovated. I was helping him build out the office late one night. He went to the bathroom, and I kept plunking away. I was on the floor and set my hammer down. I felt something of presence and looked to where I thought someone would be. Nothing. I reached back down for my hammer, and it's out of arm's reach, maybe 5 feet further than where I had set it down. I hadn't moved at all. He comes back after he's finished, and I tell him what had just happened. He laughed and said, "The little girl must be playing with you." Little girl, what? He then tells me that every now and then, he hears a little girl laughing and has even seen her. She's always wearing the same pair of overalls, and she just kind of wanders around upstairs. I'm not one to believe in paranormal experiences, but I have no explanation other than a little girl ghost just wanted to play. My girlfriend and I were driving back to her parents' house when I was probably 17 or 18. We went down this one road, and she screamed for me to swerve. I figured she saw a deer. When I turned my head, I saw a woman dressed in white pushing a white bassinet. She was also holding a boy's hand, and he was wearing white. They weren't in my rear view. Was visiting a friend in Chicago. She told me under no uncertain terms the ghost of a woman who lived there wasn't really fond of men staying there. I was told that I needed to make sure I closed any door behind me, lest she slammed the door behind me. Sure as hell, first night I'm there, I get up to go pee in the middle of the night, and I didn't close the bedroom door when I came back from the bathroom. Door slammed so hard it knocked a piece of art off the wall. My grandma, great-grandma, and their dog moved into an old cabin. There were many stories she had about strange things that happened in the house. Sinks turning on in the middle of the night, noises of footsteps in the attic, motion sensor nightlights turning on when my great-grandma was asleep with the dog in another room, etc. Also, there were crosses carved above many of the doorways. When they moved in, my aunt helped with some painting and covered the crosses in the process. As they covered them, they heard noises coming from another part of the house. The next day, the crosses were all back. Coincidentally, my mom's boss's son just recently moved into the same house 15 years later, and she was telling my mom about her son's haunted house before ever being told that my grandma and great-grandma lived there. Last summer, I was helping my boyfriend clean up his house a bit. At least 2 or 3 times, I swear I felt him standing right next to me, but he'd be across the room. I just brushed it off. Then he was running some garbage outside to his dumpster, and I was sweeping. I took a step backwards, and I felt something brush against my back, so I said, "Oh, sorry, didn't hear you come back in," as I turned around, thinking I'd bumped into him. And then my boyfriend walked in the front door in the other room. After that, he told me that his whole family has stuff like that happen all the time, and they're pretty sure their house, which is a massive 3-story place, about 100 years old, has at least 3 different spirits in it, and he thinks one got curious. My best one happened when my at the time best friend and I volunteered to help clean up a cemetery after a big storm my senior year. We were walking along, talking, picking up branches and stuff from the storm, tidying up stuff left on graves, just making an afternoon of it. And suddenly, at the exact same time, we both froze and turned to look at the same spot behind us. After asking what each other heard, we confirmed that we both heard a woman's voice go, "SHHH," right behind us. It wasn't like the wind in the trees. It was like when the B*T*Chi librarian catches you talking louder than 5 decibels. And we both looked at the exact same spot where it came from. There was no one there. The closest person to us was a good 50 feet away. They'd have had to yell just for us to hear them. Curious, my friend took a look at the headstone right there, then looked at the one next to it. Y'all, it was a mother buried next to her infant. We were disturbing the baby. When I was 10, I was in bed with my back to the door and suddenly felt something standing in my bedroom staring at my back. I'd never felt scared in that room before, but in that moment, there was no doubt something was in there with me. I was frozen in sheer terror and couldn't move. Dead silence, just me and whatever it was. After a few minutes, I screamed bloody murder for my dad, who came running into the room. As soon as he opened the door, he asked me, "What was that?" Every once in a while, one of us will bring it up. Never happened again after that. My mother opened a clothing store downtown, and the building she and her partner rents was at one time a popular brothel. It's a beautiful building, but very haunted. One night, she had closed up for the night, locked the doors, set the alarms, and went home for the evening. Around 3 or 4 a.m., the police department called her and told her someone was in her store and had turned all the lights on, and it looked like in caps and things were turned over and items were all over the floor. The police told her that they didn't suspect anyone was in the building, and the doors were still locked. They also said by the looks of things, it was extremely unnerving, and that it'd be better if she went to check on things, so she did. When she got to the store, she went into the basement where handbags and merchandise were kept in storage. She said the door, which was locked by deadbolts, was wide open, the handbags were thrown around, and clothes were scattered all over the place. I used to work in a bar that wasn't exactly a jail, but temporarily held people awaiting court and sentencing. Everyone had stories about the residential ghost, who we called Sebastian. First time I saw Sebastian, I looked down the stairs while I was opening and saw some legs in black pants and smart shoes. The ceiling obscured his torso upwards. When I went downstairs to ask how he got in, he ran down the hallway and vanished. A few other staff members mentioned seeing a man in a black suit who would be in the bar after hours while they'd be cleaning. But when they'd approach or speak to him, he'd turn a corner and disappear. Sometimes after closing, you'd hear someone ringing the bells on staff members' bikes downstairs, or you'd hear a crash and the bikes would be moved to a different place. Other times, you'd see a man in black duck into the office, and by the time you'd enter, he'd be gone. The clincher that convinced us all that it wasn't just a thing we all believed because we all joked about it so often was the day the new chefs came. They didn't speak much English and would leave once dinner service was over, so they never engaged in the Sebastian stories. One day, one of them asked about a man in black who kept leaning on the ordering window while they were cleaning. Sebastian was pretty chill though. He never scared us or did anything mean. I think he just liked hanging out. Up until my mid-20s, I would have told you there's no such thing as ghosts. Now I just don't know. When I was newly married, my spouse and I moved for his job. We needed to find a place to live pretty quickly and lucked into the perfect house. It was old and had been someone's beach cottage. It was on the back half of someone's property, with one road in and out and lots of trees and shade. It was very quiet, and there were no other people around. Because the house was originally a weekend cottage, it was one big room, with a small addition to one side that contained a kitchen and bath, and another addition off the back that had a bedroom. The thing that kind of pinged my radar was the landlord. He was overly insistent that we sign a year lease, and we couldn't break it for any reason. It didn't really register at the time, other than I was a bit worried that maybe there were troublemakers or noisy parties on the beach or something. He assured us that it was a very quiet neighborhood, but he repeated again that we couldn't break the lease. I worked a 9-to-5 job. My spouse worked 12-hour on-off shifts, so there were lots of times when I would be home by myself. The first month or two were fine. I'm mostly a homebody, so when the spouse was at work, I would stay at home. Sometime around the third month, I started to get very strong feelings that someone would be standing behind me while I was reading. It only happened when I was alone in the house, and only when I was in the main room. Without thinking about it too much, I started sitting places where my back was to the wall, or reading in the bedroom. When I went to bed at night, I started closing the door between the bedroom and the rest of the house. I felt safe in the bedroom. Sometimes, when I fell asleep in front of the TV late at night, I'd wake up to catch someone standing in front of the fireplace, just out of the corner of my eye. I thought I needed to stop dreaming so much, but I started to stay in the bedroom after dark, with the door shut. Then things started not being where I put them in the big room. I wasted 5 to 10 minutes almost every day looking for my handbag or my car keys. One day when I came home after work, I found my knitting yarn wrapped and tangled around all the furniture in the big room. I don't mean just a little bit, I mean the yarn was strung between couches and wrapped around the legs of the chairs. I told myself that my spouse was playing a trick on me, and I cleaned it up. Then I decided that I wouldn't mention it to him, just to see how long it took him to come clean. He never did. I moved my knitting to the bedroom. My sister came to visit for a long weekend. She slept on the pull-out sofa in the big room. After the first night, she told us that the sofa wasn't very comfortable, and she thought she was coming down with something, so she changed her travel arrangements. She left that afternoon. She seemed agitated, but she wouldn't talk about it. A few days after she went home, she called and said, "I know you don't believe in ghosts, and maybe I'm just being stupid." My heart dropped. I thought I was the only one. She went on to tell me that after she went to sleep that night in the big room, noises woke her up. She thought it was one of us, but no one was there. Then the windows started opening and closing around the room. One window opened and closed, then the one next to that. Then she heard footsteps walking towards her, but no one was there. The footsteps walked right up to the bed where she was sitting, then over it, continued across the room, and out through the side door into the kitchen area. She said she ran out the front door and spent the rest of the night on the front porch. She came back inside when the sun came up, waited for us to wake up, and made excuses to go home. She didn't want to spend another night in that house. A few weeks after that, just when I'd stopped jumping at every stray noise, I woke up one Sunday morning and went to cook a leisurely breakfast. And y'all, I still don't know how to explain this when I opened the kitchen cabinets to get the dishes out. All the dishes were rearranged, not messy, not tumbled about. They were all very neat and orderly, but everything was on the wrong shelf. The shelf that normally held glasses now had plates stacked on them. The shelves that normally held bowls now had glasses on them. My first thought was that someone had been in the house during the night. I checked all the locks. Still locked. I pretended it never happened. I pretended that I always kept the glasses on that shelf, and there was nothing strange about having all the plates on this shelf. I cooked breakfast. I went on with my day. Later that afternoon, I told my spouse that I wasn't really comfortable in this house anymore. Could we find somewhere else to live? Amazingly enough, my spouse never asked me why. He simply said that was probably a good idea and let's find something quickly. We moved out and called the landlord after we'd already packed and moved the furniture. He came over and picked up the keys. He never, not once, asked why we were moving. In fact, he never met our eyes. We agreed to keep paying rent until he could get some new tenants. Months later, I asked my spouse if he ever felt anything strange in that house. He said, "Yeah, that wasn't a good house. Glad we moved." That's all we have time for this evening. I hope none of these stories have been too creepy for you. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you will be alerted to new videos being uploaded. Good night, pleasant dreams, and thank you for listening.